Or maybe those. Used them at my wedding.
Okay, this is something that I've always struggled with in just about all the timelines and stuff like that. So I wanted to stop and kind of catch up on where we are. Because we dealt with the fall of the Roman Empire. And the fall of the Roman Empire is when the Middle Ages started. So now we go to the Middle Ages.
Could you affix an approximate year or century
Yeah.
to that?
We're gonna say this is not, exact, but what they call the Middle Ages usually is from the 5th to the 15th century.
So that's when it enters Renaissance.
But the Renaissance is another 100
Yeah. After this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the Middle Ages, you hear people talk about the Dark Ages, and that's from the 5th to the 10th century. And they talk about the Dark Ages because they say that culturally, religiously, economically, and all that stuff, there wasn't that much. Well, now they've decided there probably was a lot more development during this period than what we think. And so now, the end thing now is to call the Dark Ages the early Middle Ages. All the historians are saying we probably shouldn't use the word Dark Ages anymore. And then at the end of the 5th century, this right here, remember this is the Henry VIII that we talked about last time. He came in, he was monarch from 1509 to 1547. And now we go into the Renaissance. Renaissance then would be the 15th to the 16th centuries. And then during this period is when the monarchs finally came down to Elizabeth I. She was the monarch from 1533 to 1603. And if you really want to get deep into the weeds, look on Wikipedia for Elizabeth I. It is absolutely incredible what happened with her. She became monarch when she was 25, and I got started reading, and I wasted at least an hour reading about Elizabeth I and all the bizarre things that happened while she was. And it was during this period.
And that was during the 15th and 16th century?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that happened during this time was in 1559 was when they passed the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity, and that was pretty well the end of the Catholic reign in England. You remember last time we talked about that this monarch would be Protestant and then kill a bunch of Catholics, and then the next one would be Catholic and then kill a bunch of Protestants, and that pretty well ended in 1559. There were a whole bunch of controversy about Elizabeth I. One of the controversies was whether or not she was Protestant or Catholic, because she never would say. And so she did all these things to, maybe everybody said, well, she's doing that for the Catholics, and she'd do something else. And I said, well, she's doing that. And the other thing that they debated about was whether or not she remained a virgin the whole time. And that was
she wasn't married?
That was, no, she wasn't married.
Yeah.
And she had a boyhood boyfriend from Spain that she was going to marry at some point, but he was married. And then his wife mysteriously died in a fall down a staircase or something. And then they were going to get married. And then the parliament told her that if she married him, she was gonna get excommunicated or something. It's an incredible story. And so if you got a lot of time you wanna waste, read about Elizabeth first. Okay, now we're at the Renaissance. The next thing, this now is where we were last week, is when the Reformation started.
Just to clarify your comment, her reign was really the 16th century,
Oh,
because
okay.
she died in 1603.
Oh, okay,
No, she was the monarch from 1533 to 1603.
okay.
Maybe? No, she might have died in 1603. Yeah, that's when it ended, when she died.
Right, so that would
Yeah, she
make
was-
her a 16th century monarch.
Mhm.
Sure.
Okay, and now we got the Reformation in the 16th or 17th century. That was when, well, let's go on a little bit farther. Right after that was the Enlightenment. Or the Age of Reason. And that's the 17th through the 18th century. And during this time, in the 18th century, we had King George II and King George III. King George VII reigned 1727 to 1760. King George III was 1760 to 1820, so he was in there for a long time. And this is the time that the Wesleys came in. John Wesley lived from 1703 to 1791, so most of his active period was during King George III. The other thing to remember is that ever since the time of Henry VIII, the British monarch was the supreme governor of the Anglican Church.
Yes.
Like even King Charles now is the supreme governor of the Anglican Church.
Right.
Now that's a what you call it, ceremonial. It's not, you know, he doesn't have that much to do with it, except that the king or queen appoints the bishops into the parishes. But as far as actually the spiritual leader of the church is always the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that brings us up to where we are now. And so now we see, I've got some really good videos. I really like these. Now let's talk about wrestling.
Life in 18th century England was a time of major economic and social change. In London, a great many people lived in severe poverty, inadequate housing, primitive sanitation, scarcity of food and water. Life was insecure. At the same time, new technologies led to increased production, steam power, improved transportation. England was in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution.
It's not easy living in the city, but if you stay on the farm right, you'll never have anything. The merchants are getting rich and the rest of us are scrounging for pence.
New ways of weaving cotton and powering production drew many from the countryside to the ever more crowded cities. It wasn't uncommon to see someone die on the streets of cold and hunger. The upper class and the merchant class lived a different sort of life.
Drunkenness and prostitution is everywhere. The rich people have everything. They have plenty of ale and food. The church is ruled by the brass. If you're a nobleman, right, then you can buy a high position in Parliament or the church.
Growing up in these surroundings were two brothers, John and Charles Wesley. They were sons of an Anglican priest, Samuel, and a devoted and disciplined mother, Susanna. Their mother bore 19 children, but only 10 survived. She insisted that all, both boys and girls, could read and write in order to better serve the Lord. Their father was a strict parish priest with a love of scholarship and poetry. Some of his parishioners resented his strictness, and he did not move up the ladder to a better parish. Samuel did not manage money well, and the family's poverty was a source of stress. But their own spiritual journeys would eventually lead millions to a distinctive form of Christian revival.
My Jackie has a keen mind and good looks. His younger brother Charles is more tender and sensitive. I have taught all my children that whatever weakens your reason, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, and takes off the relish of spiritual things, that to you is sin. Susanna Wesley.
Susanna's influence on John was particularly strong. Having been rescued from a fire when he was 6, she and Samuel felt God spared him and had a special purpose for his life. By the time he was accepted to Lincoln College at Oxford University in 1720, a matter of great pride to the family because education was highly prized, he was already rich in knowledge and disciplined in manner. Though he was careful never to waste time, his friends thought him witty and cheerful.
Both John and Charles are ordained as Anglican clergy, but my friends still have a sense of spiritual uncertainty. Charles has gathered a few of us at Oxford to discuss, pray, study the Bible, and engage in social work. Because John is such a natural organizer and leader, Charles has asked him to lead us in our spiritual journey.
The journey was as much for the Wesleys as for the others in the small group. Other students at Oxford thought them odd because of their methodical schedule of prayer, fasting, and discussion.
Many times I hear classmates deride us with names like the Holy Club, Bible Moths, and Methodists. But if that is all we endure, then I'm blessed to be among those who reach out for answers.
The members of the group desired to serve the needy. Asking for and receiving approval from the Anglican Church, they visited prisons, ministered to the poor, and comforted the dispirited, giving both practical and spiritual assistance. When John and Charles were asked to sail to the American colonies in 1736, they saw it as an opportunity to grow in their own faith through ministry to the colonists and evangelism to the American Indians.
They have such high hopes for themselves and the colony called Georgia. Coming from a strong spiritual family, Jack and Charles are in need of putting their tutelage into practice.
It was not a good fit. John's methodical manner didn't sit well with the unconstrained ways of the colonists. It was a time when Benjamin Franklin was focused on innovation, and young lads like Paul Revere and George Washington would soon grow to lead their people to independence. Charles was particularly unhappy and quickly returned to England. But John stayed on for a year. He had a disastrous romance with Sophie Hopke and was literally run out of town. Dejected, he longed for assurance of his salvation.
John and Charles have returned to an England that is mired in the profits of slavery. As merchants get rich from this filthy human trade, my friends are still reaching out to the disheartened, but have yet to find comfort in their own spiritual disposition.
Susanna stressed faith to her sons in a letter to John.
Resolve to make religion the business of your life, for, after all, that is the one thing that, strictly speaking, is necessary. All things besides are comparatively little to the purpose of life. I wish you would now enter upon a strict examination of yourself, that you may know whether you have reasonable hope of salvation by Jesus Christ. Susanna Wesley.
In John's spiritual quest, he was influenced by the Moravians, a group of German pietist Christians. Their beliefs led into the realization that God's grace comes through a personal relationship with God, rooted in the Scriptures and made absolute when Jesus died for the sins of humankind.
I want the whole Christ for my Savior, the whole Bible for my book, the whole church for my fellowship, and the whole world for my mission field. John Wesley.
In May of 1738, Charles had an evangelical awakening. Within a few days, John reluctantly attended a Moravian gathering on Aldersgate Street in London. In what is referred to as the Aldersgate experience, John heard the message of God's grace, felt his heart strangely warmed, and left with an assurance of his salvation.
My sons had not been without faith, but this new assurance of their salvation gave them the connection of head and heart that they'd been seeking.
At first, John and Charles introduced their newfound faith within the walls of the Anglican Church. But as they encountered more resistance, they found innovative ways to convey their message. John moved outside church buildings and began to preach in the open air, proclaiming the message of God's forgiving grace wherever a group of listeners could be gathered. Though a talented orator, Charles turned his talents to music and began writing hymns, eventually thousands of them. Some say his music was composed from the tunes of popular pub songs, but scholars disagree on this matter. What is certain is that Charles poetically weaved clear and simple language into well-known English folk tunes that spoke powerfully to the people. John saddled up and traveled throughout the land, speaking to all who would listen, which quickly numbered in the thousands. Though he was an Anglican priest, some churches locked their doors to him, as evidenced in his journal entry.
Sunday, a.m., May 5. Preached in St. Anne's. Was asked not to come back anymore. Sunday, p.m., May 5. Preached in St. John's. Dickens said, "Get out and stay out." Sunday, May 12. Preached in St. Jude's. Can't go back there either. Sunday, May 19. Preached on street. Kicked off street. Sunday, May 26. Preached in meadow. Chased out of meadow as bull was turned loose during service. John Wesley.
He visited the prisons, the poor, and the sick. He printed his sermons and sold them for pennies. The fortune he amassed from his writings was quickly dispersed to those in need, and a wave of awakening rippled through the country.
Some churches are refusing to administer any sacraments to Jack's followers. He's being forced to administer them himself. His gift of leadership and organization is beginning to pull these people into a system of smaller religious societies.
John authorized lay preachers to preach in the colonies. These circuit riders covered thousands of miles in all kinds of conditions to minister to a spiritually hungry population. Methodism spread like wildfire in America because its theology and practice was ideally suited to the young nation as it expanded westward. Charles was uncomfortable with his brother's deviation from Anglican tradition, ordaining preachers and exercising bishop-like control. But John answered with strong rebuttal.
Do not hinder me if you will not help. Perhaps if you had kept close to me, I might have done better. However, with or without your help, I press on.
John preached over 42,000 sermons and logged over 250,000 miles through the English, Welsh, Scottish, and Irish countryside. Along the way, he and his followers built the bridge that would eventually allow millions worldwide to cross over to Christ.
caught my attention, where he was standing on a chair on the table.
Mhm.
And I noticed it was all women on the bottom floor, and it was like an operating theater. The second floor, where the square was cut out, was all men. And I didn't know if my eye just caught that wrong, or was that really, is that what I really saw?
Yeah, eventually it was. At first, it was just like 8 or 10 of them, but it continued to grow there. So the things to get out of your head is everybody will tell you that John Wesley was the founder of the United Methodist Church. John Wesley was not the founder of the United Methodist Church. John Wesley had absolutely no intention whatsoever of founding a church. He was trying to reform the Anglican Church. And so John Wesley and his brother Charles were both Anglican clergy, and they both remained Anglican clergy, and they fought all the efforts of the people that had gathered around them to form a church. They just simply would not. And when John Wesley died, he was still Anglican clergy.
Jim, in reading this, put that out, this document here, my inference, it's very clearly stated that Charles remained faithful to the Church of England, i.e. Anglican. John it seems to come across as more clever because he did not admit to developing a faith practice that was migrating away from Anglicanism, but he also did not state that he is against the Anglican Church. It seems to me, by reading this anyway, that he was walking a fine line between those two schools of thought, whereas Charles was committed to the Church of England.
I had a fairly extended debate with one of my professors online about whether or not John Wesley quietly intended on his group to drift away from the Anglican Church.
Well, it seems like he did it.
And the professor claimed that that was John Wesley's intention all along. And we debated it. I disagreed with him. I felt like John Wesley did everything he could to stop that from happening. But it was a lot of conflict between John and Charles Wesley. That's the other thing, is people will tell you that it was John and Charles Wesley worked tightly together to form the Methodist movement. And while they did work together to form the Methodist movement, they fought the entire time. They argued about almost everything. And Susanna, their mother, would be very upset with them because of all the fighting they would do, and she would tell them to stop fighting. And so what they did was, both of them knew Latin and she did not. So they would fight in letters back and forth, and they would write the letters in Latin so Mom couldn't find out what the debates were about.
I'm sorry to beg the point, but it sounds like your position is that he was not so much ambivalent about the Church of England, and it sounds like his movement was moving by its own kind of inertia toward a new identity.
Yeah, he would, when they first started all this and they would have these worship services, he would not serve communion in the worship service. He said, no, if you want to take communion, you go to the Anglican Church on Sunday. He would not allow them to have any worship services on Sunday morning. They had to worship during the week because he did not want to interfere with the Anglican. But then when the priests in the nearby Anglican church refused to serve communion to anybody that had been to a Methodist meeting that week, that made John mad, and he would start serving communion to them. So he was, you saw him through the decades gradually changing. And I think towards the end, I don't think it was his intention to do that as much as he gave up.
I see.
And Charles got mad at him for not fighting
Yeah.
harder than he felt like he You've got two handouts here, one of them on John Wesley, one of them on Charles Wesley, and there's a few things to note here. That's on the first page of the Charles Wesley thing. About 2/3 down the page, it says, the next day, 21 May, Charles described feeling a strange palpitation of his heart and believed God had truly forgiven and saved him. They were Anglican priests at the time, but they did not have a deep spiritual converting experience until after they were priests. And Charles's experience came several days before John's experience. And we always hear about John Wesley having the Aldersgate experience where he went to this Moravian Bible study and he said his heart was strangely warmed. And that's the big deal. We always, as Methodists, we make a big deal about John Wesley's heart being strangely warmed. John wrote about that in one of his journals, but then he didn't say anything about it for the rest of his life. So maybe it wasn't as big a deal. I think we make a bigger deal out of it than John Wesley made of it. Has anybody seen my Wesley socks?
Yeah.
Are you wearing those today?
No, I should have worn them today. It has pictures of John Wesley on them. And then when you hold the foot up on the bottom, it says, "Feet are strangely warmed."
You bet.
Okay, what else have I got? On the other side, on John's side, in the bottom end of the second paragraph, you'll say the new London base for Methodism was the City Road Chapel Church, and Charles became its principal minister. And this was right in the time where we were trying to figure out, they were trying to figure out if they're going to be a church or not.
Where are you looking?
Even, it's on page 2 of Charles Wesley.
Oh, Charles.
Yeah, the end of the second paragraph. He became a minister of that church, but he was still an Anglican priest. Now here's I want to just go ahead and read this because it kind of addresses, Robert, what you were talking about. There in the middle of that third paragraph. When a campaign began among some Methodists to split from the Church of England, John Wesley did not act either for or against.
Yeah.
Instead, at the 1780 annual Methodist conference, the campaign was silenced and the declaration made that anyone who split from the church would no longer be a Methodist. Best speculates, G.M. Best speculates that Charles and his supporters were behind this conference decision. So see, he was still fighting it, but he wasn't openly opposing it.
Well, it just sounds ambivalent to me.
So that'll give you some information on Charles. A little bit now on this handout on John Wesley. When they said, did you read the part where both of them went to Georgia in America to work in the colonies and everything? This paper here will tell you Wesley decided to sail to America. Wesley did not decide to sail to America. Wesley was appointed, because the Anglicans do the same thing. They appoint ministers to where they are expected to go. So that wasn't one of those things where John Wesley said, oh, I think I'll go to America. No, they told him, we think you ought to go to America. Now, he did talk Charles into going with him. And so the two of them went over, and things didn't go well. And Charles went back first, and John stayed on. Towards the middle down here, it says, a judge in Savannah issued a warrant for Wesley's arrest because Wesley repelled Miss Williamson, a member of his congregation, from Holy Communion. Boy, there's a whole lot more to that story, and it's alluded to a little bit in the video we watched, where because John and Charles were not getting along, and Charles had given up, and Charles was going to go back, this Mrs. Williamson was, her maiden name was Hockey, and her name was Sophie Hopkey, and she was John's girlfriend. And John did not propose to her. Okay, before Charles left, he went to Sophie Hopkey, and he said, John is never going to marry you. You might as well give up on him and look around for someone else. So then she found this Williamson guy and got married to him, and that's why John would not let her or her new husband take communion, was because she had spurned him. That's what they say, that's the rest of the story.
Yeah.
And John found out that Charles was the one that had caused all that, which caused another big fight. And later on, several years down the road, John had the opportunity to return the favor with Charles's girlfriend, and broke up Charles and his girlfriend when they got back together. What else have I got? Down here it talks about, you'll read in here, and it said in there, it talked about John making this decision to go out and do field preaching. John did not make the decision to go out and do field preaching. He thought that was vulgar, and no proper minister would go preach out on the street or anything. He was not going to do it. We're going to bring in this guy later on called Charles Whitfield, who was also an Anglican priest, and he was the one that started doing the field preaching. But then he got called to go to America, and he's the one that talked John into doing the field preaching. And he said, John, he said, I'm in Bristol, I'm preaching to these coal miners out in the field, and I'm leaving, and there's not going to be anybody taking my place. So just come just once and just preach to them. And so when John came and he saw like 10 or 15,000 of them out there, he thought, well, this is stupid. And he said, and he wrote in his journal, I made the decision to become more vile and go out and preach. And that's how he got started. Not because he wanted to do it, just because Whitfield talked him into it. Okay, on the other side of that page, in the middle of the page, it said Wesley held the first annual Methodist conference at the King's Foundry on June 25th, 1744. So that's the very first Methodist conference that happened, and I always remember that now because that's the question that I missed on one of my exams in school, where the first annual conference is. And I think in the ones that I handed out at the bottom of that page, is there a link?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, if you want to know everything else about it, I don't have the link on my page, but if you go there, it's pretty well this page, but I edited about half of it out, so if you want to follow all the other Charles Wesley stuff, you can go there, and then it's got links there that take you all over the place, and you can waste 2 or 3 days.
You should have continued reading. The constable issued a warrant for his arrest after he broke his promise not to preach for 30 days. And then he was accused of inciting riots.
I've had, through my career, I've had several people tell me that they understood why I identified with John Wesley, because I caused just as much trouble.
Well, good for you.
Everybody that tells me I say I'm causing trouble, they say, well, that's just like John Wesley did, so you're in good company.
You're the Methodist John Lewis.
Yeah. Okay, which one next? Next one is origins.
John Wesley was born in 1703, just before the Industrial Revolution took place, during a time when England was a firmly Anglican country. He was born in the small village of Epworth in the north of England, where his father served as the rector. This here is the family home where he would have grown up and spent his childhood. His mother bore 19 children in total, and the most famous of the others was Charles Wesley. Both of the parents were spiritual people and ran the home according to strict rules. No eating in between meals, and once a week they had an interview with their mother for the purpose of spiritual instruction. John and his brother Charles came here to study at Oxford University, where they enrolled at Christ College. Many of the great movements of this world have been born at universities, and although he did not know it at the time, John Wesley was about to be part of this phenomenon. He graduated from Christ College with a bachelor's and then with a master's, before he was elected a fellow at Lincoln College, where he was given his own room and a salary. His room can still be seen today, preserved as he left it. He left for about a year or so to go back to Epworth at the request of his father before returning back here to university. It was on his return that he found his brother Charles had started a small club for the purpose of Bible study and in pursuit of Christian life. Each member took vows to lead holy lives, pray daily, take communion weekly, and visit prisons regularly. The group was incredibly practical, preaching, educating, relieving jail debtors where possible, and caring for the sick. They would fast every Wednesday, and on each day they would meet from 6 to 9 p.m., and the name that they were called was the Holy Club. However, this is not what they became known by. In 1733, an unknown author wrote in a pamphlet and described them as the Oxford Methodists, and slowly this name began to stick. It was also here that John Wesley's paths would cross with another man who would go on to have a huge impact, George Whitefield. George Whitefield graduated from Pembroke College, and when he finished university, rather than settle in a parish, he immediately began preaching, becoming an itinerant preacher and evangelist. He traveled all over England, in particular in Bristol, where he spent some time with John Wesley, and they both did open-air preaching. Both the Wesleys and Whitefield would spend time in America, but with differing results in their ministries. John Wesley went to Georgia, but it did not go very well, and he returned home to England. George Whitefield traveled to America on 7 different occasions, had much success, and was well liked. He was involved in the Great Awakening that took place in the 1700s, a great religious revival, and is also remembered as one of the first that preached to those enslaved. The roots of this far-reaching movement of Methodism go back to a small group Bible study with a handful of students on a university campus. Zechariah chapter 4 verse 10 says, "Do not despise the day of small things. Never underestimate the impact of a small movement with humble beginnings." The Wesleys and Whitefield did not start the Holy Club because they wanted to found a church or travel the world, but because they wanted to change their life and the lives of those around them. I pray that you may seek to make a difference wherever you are, be it at home, work, or school. Do not despise the day of small things.
So that's a name that we don't say anything about, and that's George Whitefield. George Whitefield had more to do with the development of the Methodist Church in America than John Wesley did. And he was over here preaching. John Wesley didn't come over here and preach. It was Whitefield that came over here and preached. And then John Wesley sent a few other priests over. He sent several, but then he finally sent Francis Asbury and Thomas Coke, and they came over to organize everything. And as soon as they got over here, they had a big meeting, and they installed each other as bishops of the Methodist Church. John Wesley had a fit. He wrote them a nasty letter, and he said, "You can call me a scoundrel and a knave, but never use the term bishop to apply to me. How dare you declare yourself a bishop?" And that was the beginning of the end of the relationship between the American Methodists and John Wesley. It went downhill from then Thomas Coke finally gave up and went to the West Indies or something like that, but it was Francis Asbury on his horse riding all over the New World, setting up churches and installing people. The vast majority of the preachers were lay people like me. And so it's actually Francis Asbury that had more to do with the development of the Methodist Church in America than John Wesley did.
Did Whitefield acknowledge a schism between the Anglicans and Methodists?
I don't think he ever became, a member of a Methodist church. I think he still considered himself to be an Anglican priest.
Really?
Now, one of the things that happened was that when John Wesley would set up these preaching houses all over England, he put them all in his name. All the deeds were in John Wesley's name. He had complete control over the building, which we call that a trust clause now in the Methodist Church now, where the Methodist hierarchy have control over this building. We could not meet together and decide this is no longer a Methodist church. Because if we met together and said this is no longer a Methodist church, that's when Karen Hernandez comes by and says, well, give me the keys then. Because this building and this land belongs to the Methodist church. And that started with John Wesley. The difference, John Wesley and George Whitefield were really, really good friends. And they got along really, really well. And the interesting thing about that was that Whitefield was a Calvinist.
Oh.
And Wesley was an Armenian. So that's a pretty major theological
they
split.
must have had some interesting conversations.
Mm-hmm. But and I'm sure they did have quite a few debates about it, but and Whitefield died before John Wesley did, but until the time that George Whitefield died, Wesley had in all the deeds of all the churches that the property would go to Max Whitefield if John Wesley died. He was going to turn the whole Methodist church over to Max.
Wow.
So if John Wesley had died first, we would be Calvinist.
Think so, huh?
Mm-hmm. Because Whitefield would then be in charge of all the churches.
So it was Wesley personally who said, forget predetermination, salvation is available to all people.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like he prevailed.
Yeah, he prevailed because he lived longer.
I see.
And he still owned the property when he died, and Whitefield was dead by then, so Whitefield couldn't take it over and change it.
I see. Well, thank goodness.
So this last thing we're going to do is we're going to cover a little bit more about Whitefield.
Impact in his ministry in America than in England. And in the 18th century, apart from the monarchy, he was perhaps the best known name on the whole of the East Coast. Virtually every man, woman, and child had heard the great itinerant priest at least once. He preached over 18,000 sermons in the course of his life. At the age of 55, in 1770, he was still preaching regularly despite ill health. He once famously said, "I would rather wear out than rust out." He died whilst on a trip to America in Massachusetts and is buried in the crypt of the Old South Presbyterian Church, Newburyport, Massachusetts. John Wesley, on the other hand, chose to stay here in England, and through the course of his long ministry, he would have a huge impact here. After he settled in London, John Wesley lived in this house here. However, he spent most of his time away from here, traversing the country on horseback, preaching and visiting the numerous small Bible study groups that he had set up. Through the course of his life, it is estimated that he traveled over 240,000 miles on horseback, often reading as he rode so as not to waste time. He once said, "The world is my parish." These words are engraved on his statue outside his home. He explained this by saying that wherever he was in the world, it was his duty to witness and minister there. Prayer was an integral part of John Wesley's life, and he wanted a special place to pray, so he had an extension built on the back of his house. You can see it today around the back, protruding out the back. You know, sometimes today, those of us who own houses, we sometimes will build a bigger kitchen, a bigger living area, or a bigger garage if we have some money. And yet Wesley took the time and money that he had to build a special place dedicated for prayer. This room is sometimes called the engine room of Methodism, and you can visit it today and pray there where John Wesley used to pray every day. It is sometimes said that big things come in small packages. John Wesley was only 5'3" or 161 centimeters, yet he was a giant of a man. He never intended to start his own denomination, and yet the movement that started as just a collective of small Bible study groups mushroomed into its own denomination. He died on the 2nd of March, 1791. And as he lay dying with his friends surrounding him, he grasped their hands and said repeatedly, "Farewell, farewell." Then summoning up all his strength, he said, "The best of all is, God is with us." Then raising his arms one last time, he said, "The best of all is, God is with us." To Wesley, it was granted to arouse the church in England from a state of stagnation and backsliding. And yet he was faithful in this duty. Two things that stand out from his life and ministry are the importance of the preaching of the word and the importance of small group Bible study. These two methods, I believe, divinely ordained, if done today, will cause the same revival in our lives and ministry that they caused back then. Wherever you are, whether it's preaching the word in your home church or in your home area, or whether it's doing small group Bible study in your family or in your home or in your workplace or amongst your friends, be faithful in doing these things, for that we can have the same revival that Wesley had several hundred years ago, and God can use those methods again today in our lives.
Another interesting thing is that Charles Wesley and Whitefield were both better preachers than John Wesley. Of all that he did, he was not a good preacher. He was a very weak preacher. And of course he came out with these crazy ideas that would get him thrown out of the church. But he was not very charismatic. He just simply was a lousy preacher. He also, when he had all these local church pastors were formed because of Francis Esbury appointed all these pastors and everything. He also fought diligently to stop the local church pastors from being allowed to serve communion. He wouldn't let local church pastors baptize or serve communion. Gradually, the Anglican priests came over and became ordained, and as it became the Methodist Church, they became ordained in the Methodist Church. But that would be the ones that would go through periodically. And then when they finally let the local church pastors baptize and serve communion, they were still on a circuit too. And they were on like an 8-week or a 12-week circuit. And they would drive around and they would stop and stay with someone and have a couple of worship services, and then they'd load their horse up and then move on. That's why we don't take communion every week in the Methodist Church. Because that's where it started, is they had to wait for the preacher to come by and do that. What else do I want to tell you about that? The local church pastors then, Wesley's instructions to them were to sleep no later than 4 o'clock and to spend at least 2 hours in Bible study before they went out of their house to do anything every day. And also, they had a big saddle bag thing that was full of books. And that's a lot of their salary, was they would sell the books. And so many of them would be in financial trouble with the conference, because they would not be able to take money for the books, and they'd end up giving the books away, and then they would owe for the books, and so that was a big mess as well. We are not going to get into, and Lisa's very unhappy that we're not going to get into this, in that when they finally started the Methodist Church, it was called the Methodist Episcopal Church, and it has split 10 or 12 times and come back together almost as many times, from the Methodist Episcopal Church to the Methodist Episcopal Church South, over where they split over slavery, and then the Free Methodists split off, and then there are several different Methodist denominations. There still are a lot of different Methodist denominations, and there are Wesleyan denominations that don't necessarily call themselves Methodist either. They'll call themselves a Wesleyan denomination, and then they gradually started to come back in together to form the United Methodist Church, and that did not happen until 1968. So,
Is that when, no, it was before then that it became the United Methodist Church. So I
No.
remember when we were first United Methodist Church here, and then they just went to United Methodist Church. So
Yeah.
maybe it was just First Methodist Church.
United, yeah, it was the Methodist. It could have been the first Methodist church.
Yeah.
But the word united didn't come in until 1968.
Okay.
And that happened in Dallas, Texas, when the Methodist Church joined with the Evangelical United Brethren Church.
Oh, okay.
So that's where we got the word united. And that's where we got the cross in flame. The flame has there's 2 tongues of fire in the flame. One of them represents the Methodist Church, and one of them represents the Evangelical United Brethren
Oh,
Church.
that's interesting.
That's all I got. What else you want to talk about?
Don't you find it interesting that in Savannah, Georgia, that there's a statute for the guy that wasn't very successful and was ran out of town?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really blew it.
It also doesn't really make sense that if Whitfield was coming here and he was preaching, and he wasn't really Methodist, or he wasn't really following that process.
And I don't know where he ended up at the end either. I don't know if he, I know he didn't become United Methodist, but I don't know what else.
My great-grandfather was
Uh-huh.
a founder of the Free Methodist Church.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, mid-20th century. He rode horseback from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Pasadena, California,
Uh-huh.
preaching along the way. I don't know if he planted churches, but he was certainly proselytizing
Mm-hmm.
all along, and he kept journals as to his preaching events and the number of souls he thought he saved.
And what year was that again?
Well, I would say it was, the Free Methodist Church was free because they opposed slavery.
Oh,
So it was late 19th century.
oh, okay. All right.
And they opposed pew reservations.
The what?
The pew reservations. If you paid a certain amount of money to the church, you were assigned a pew,
Oh,
and you could even put a little gate and a lock on your pew.
Oh.
Oh, my goodness.
And one of the founding documents of the Free Methodist Church was that pews would always be available to everyone.
yeah. Well, it turned out that this guy's grandson, who was my father, I'm not sure of the entire story, but he got fed up with the dogmatic approach with the Free Methodist
Yeah,
Church.
it's very dogmatic.
Yeah, and he became Presbyterian,
Mhm.
much to the chagrin of his parents.
That's the reason the Free Methodists never came back into the Methodist fold, is because they were there, and now especially they're incredibly conservative compared to the
Yes.
United Methodist Church now, so there's no way they'll ever be involved with us.
Now, I lost track on names somewhere, on John Wesley, on the churches and things, that if he died first, the deeds and things were gonna go to, was it Max Asbury or to George Whitfield?
George Whitfield.
We didn't go to Whitfield.
Yeah, all the church buildings were going to go to George Whitfield, but George died first. So I don't know what Wesley did, but he had to change his will because George was dead. Well, I do have a benediction. And the benediction is from John Wesley himself.
In his own words, too?
Yes, in his own words.
Okay.
Our greetings from Michael and I attended Michael and our horses and of course me, John West. God bless you. And we really look forward to doing all the good we can, by all the means we can, in all the ways we can, in all the places we can, at all the times we can, to all the people we can, as long as ever we can. And we'll see you next Sunday morning. God bless you.
Wow.
Cool.
It sounds like he was speaking from the grave, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was B.J. Johnson in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, who is a John Wesley impersonator.
Oh, really?
And he comes to churches in the full outfit and does an 1.5-hour program
Oh, my goodness.
about John Wesley. And anytime he would call me, if he got my answering machine, he would be John Wesley.
Hey, what was his name?
How fun.
B.J. Johnson. And this is a recording I got off my phone. He did that to me one time.
I caught one of his things when I lived in Siloam Springs.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I didn't, it didn't even relate back to this, I'd totally forgotten about it. It's just,
Well, he has family in Seattle, and he's promised me that if he ever comes out here to go to Seattle, he will look me up and he will do a thing for my, wherever church I'm at, he's promised. Well, that's it.
Okay. No meeting next week, right?
Right, we got now committee meeting.
Okay.